Oh, hello there. I didn't see you because this is an audio medium. Hello, my name is Michael Lucht, and this is Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclasts, the podcast. Specifically, this episode is a 1.5 episode, which I had to extract from the overall main episode because it just would have been ridiculously long, and no one wants to listen to a 4-hour podcast unless it's Dan Carlin or something like that. So I took this out, but wanted to keep it because it's basically all of the literary and esoteric, etc., paranormal, parapsychology, fringe science type stuff that essentially inspired this whole theoretical framework of megalopolimancy. And I wanted people who are, if you're particularly interested in this stuff, track down these sources, check them out. Either way, it's good stuff. It's great stuff. And it's essentially been my only escape from the cruel, unmerciless taunts and jabs of a feral, venomous reality. For what seems like several months now. That's how long I've been working on this series. So, I like it a lot, and I hope you do too. Check it out, and if you're interested, again, check out the sources, read them, and feel better about your knowledge of stuff and information on things. I've been recording too long. Just, here's the episode.
Whoosh.
The city reveals itself not as a neutral backdrop, but as a palimpsest, there it is again, where layers of time, power, and consciousness are folded together, waiting to be read by those who know how to look. Every street corner is a portal to another time, and every building is a physical manifestation of a psychological state. The built environment is never neutral. It's always either lifting us toward transcendence or weighing us down to keep us imprisoned within the false realities of the material world. In order for us to see the prison walls all that more clearly, we must now take a look at what is just a modest collection of some of the literary and esoteric influences that went into creating this. I think I have enough time to squeeze this in and still get to all of our real life examples. So, real quick.
Whoosh.
Oh, past me, this is future me, coming back to say that you sound quite the fool. Quite the fool indeed, because no, there wasn't enough time to put these literary and esoteric influences into the main episode. Hence, this is the 1.5 episode. So, here we go. Separating it out, letting you know. But yes, giving this a listen does enrich the rest of the series. It lets you know the major sources of ideas, etc. And for anyone who wants to explore further and look into these concepts, and some pretty good literature as well. Some good fiction and some thought-provoking, esoteric / mathematic zippy-doppity-doo. So, moving on.
Whoosh.
And this also can act as like, if you're really interested in this this topic, this conceptual framework, check out these books and media I'm about to mention, because they really play into this, and they give you a lot of kind of working examples. Acts as theory fiction in some examples. So yeah, the study of urban occultism operates at the intersection of spatial theory, esoteric practice, and architectural history. 4 primary conceptual frameworks anchor this bibliography. Infernal geometry, which is the use of non-Euclidean or adversarial spatial configurations to manipulate consciousness or channel extra-dimensional forces. Megalopolimancy, the divination and magical manipulation of large-scale urban environments as living entities. Psychogeography, the study of how geographical environments affect the emotions and behavior of individuals. And geomancy, the esoteric art of placing structures in harmony with terrestrial and celestial energies. These concepts suggest that sites aren't merely collections of buildings and infrastructure, but complex symbolic machines capable of influencing human consciousness, storing historical trauma, and potentially serving as conduits for non-human intelligences. The following sources provide the theoretical and imaginative foundations for understanding how the built environment functions as an active participant in occult phenomena. So first off, old cylinder head himself, Howard Phillips Lovecraft, that impeccable specimen of Anglo-Saxon superiority. Jesus. Howard Phillips Lovecraft's contribution to speculative fiction extend beyond cosmic horror into the mathematical foundations of spatial dread. While Lovecraft frequently utilized quote-unquote non-Euclidean geometry as shorthand for the alien and incomprehensible, his deployment of these concepts relies upon legitimate mathematical principles regarding spaces that defy three-dimensional intuition. The Call of Cthulhu, 1926, presents the most famous literary example of non-Euclidean architecture in the sunken city of Arlaia, where Cthulhu waits dreaming. Sailors encountering the city describe broad glancing surfaces and angles that violate Euclidean principles, concave surfaces appearing convex, acute angles behaving as obtuse, and structures that seem to shift perspective when viewed from different positions. The text suggests that these geometries induce specific psychological effects, such as disorientation, temporal distortion, and the intrusion of higher dimensional realities or intelligences into three-dimensional perception. When a sailor is swallowed by an angle that shouldn't exist, Lovecraft literalizes the concept of hostile architecture as a predatory space. The Dreams in the Witch House, 1932, advances these concepts by connecting non-Euclidean geometry to quantum physics and interdimensional travel. The protagonist, Walter Gilman, studies non-Euclidean calculus and discovers that the strange angles in his attic room function as portals to other dimensions. Here, Lovecraft treats geometry not merely as an aesthetic description, but as functional technology, specific angular configurations serving as gateways that allow a 17th century witch and her familiar in the form of a rat with a human face to traverse space and time. The story establishes the precedent that architectural anomalies can serve as window areas where the veil between dimensions is at its thinnest. There's also Through the Gates of the Silver Key, 1933, co-authored with E. Hoffman Price, which expands these concepts into full multidimensional cosmology. The narrative posits that three-dimensional reality represents merely a projection or slice of a larger four-dimensional existence. The story introduces the concept that there exists an infinity of directions beyond standard Cartesian coordinates, northwest, southeast, suggesting that human perception is limited to a narrow band of spatial experience. This aligns with mathematical theories of higher dimensions and provides the metaphysical framework for understanding how certain architectural configurations might serve as interfaces with these extended realities. And then there's Frank Belknap Long's The Hounds of Tyndalos, 1929. Though not authored by Lovecraft specifically, it exists within the Lovecraftian Cthulhu mythos and deserves inclusion for its geometric innovations. The story follows Halpin Chalmers, who utilizes the psychoactive drug Liao to perceive time as angular rather than curved. Chalmers theorizes that time and space consist of quote-unquote angles and curves, with the former representing entry points to alien dimensions. By plastering curves over all right angles in his home, he attempts to prevent the hounds, these predatory entities from deep time, from entering into his house, his space. This establishes the concept of angular magic, the idea that specific geometric configurations can serve as wards or invitations to non-human entities. This book also, I think, is one of the earliest examples of a drug-induced psychotic split that I've ever read, at least. So, check it out. Lovecraft's influence extends beyond fiction into the realm of theory fiction, a hybrid genre where narrative functions as a laboratory for testing philosophical concepts. By treating non-Euclidean geometry as a source of horror, Lovecraft inadvertently establishes the foundation for understanding how architectural space might manipulate human consciousness or serve as conduits for extra-dimensional phenomena. Next up is Fritz Leiber's Our Lady of Darkness, 1977. This is the birth of megalopolimancy. This 1977 novel stands as the primary foundational text for urban occultism, introducing the term megalopolisomancy, but I've kind of refined it and shortened it down because it's kind of easier to say. So just, if anyone wants to correct me, feel free. But I'm tweaking it a little, so instead of megalopolisomancy, just megalopolimancy. Anywho, it's defined as the divination and magical manipulation of large-scale urban environments. The novel operates at the intersection of horror, urban fantasy, and occult theory, presenting San Francisco as a living engine capable of generating autonomous entities, the paramentals I mentioned earlier. The narrative follows Franz Weston, a recovering alcoholic and writer of supernatural fiction, who discovers that his city functions as a massive talisman. Through the fictional occultist named, oh boy, here we go, Thibaut de Castries, I think that's how you say it. I'm just going to call him de Castries. The fictional occultist de Castries, Leiber posits that modern cities, with their concentrations of steel, concrete, glass, and paper, specifically the written word and printed currency, act as conductors for paramental entities, beings born from inorganic material and human psychic energy. These entities exist as emergent properties of urban complexity, feeding on the emotions and attention of inhabitants while influencing the material reality of the city. De Castries' Megalopolisomancy, the fictional grimoire within the novel, suggests that specific architectural configurations within the city create circuits for channeling dark elemental forces. The novel treats the urban grid as a massive printed circuit board, where monuments and skyscrapers function as capacitors and resistors in a giant occult machine. Weston's apartment building becomes a focal point for these forces, demonstrating how individual structures within the megalopolis can serve as nodes in a larger magical network. The concept of paramental entities proves particularly significant for understanding urban occultism. Unlike traditional spirits or demons, these beings emerge from the unique conditions of modern urban life. They represent the city's own immune system or digestive apparatus, processing human experience into something inhuman. Leiber's work suggests that as cities grow in scale and complexity, they inevitably develop forms of consciousness or agency distinct from their human inhabitants. Leiber's novel also establishes the concept of necro-megalopolimancy, the hostile inversion of urban magic wherein architecture and urban design extract, concentrate, and weaponize despair, anxiety, and psychic pain. This framework explains phenomena ranging from the psychological effects of brutalist architecture to the uncanny dread associated with certain urban intersections or abandoned developments. The novel functions as theory fiction, which is a term, like I said, later popularized by the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, or CCRU, wherein the narrative itself performs philosophical work rather than merely illustrating pre-existing concepts. Another very important work is Peter Ackroyd's HAWKSMOORE, 1985. Ackroyd's HAWKSMOORE represents the definitive literary exploration of urban psychogeography and infernal geometry. The novel operates through a dual narrative structure that collapses the distance between the 18th and 20th centuries, suggesting that London's stones retain the vibrations or memories of past events across temporal boundaries. The first narrative strand follows Nicholas Dyer, a fictionalized version of the historical, real-life architect Nicholas Hawksmoore, who in the early 1700s constructs 7 churches according to principles of infernal geometry. Dyer practices a dark form of sacred architecture, viewing his churches not as monuments to divine order, but as stone prisons designed to trap living forces and appease what he terms the Great Beast. He believes that true architectural power requires foundations of blood, leading him to commit human sacrifices during construction. His geometry deliberately employs heavy, oppressive forms and dead spaces to create dread, utilizing specific mathematical ratios, i.e. squares, circles, and triangles, arranged in patterns that function as terrestrial sigils. The second narrative strand follows Detective Nicholas Hawksmoore in the 1980s. I know, it's kind of confusing. Investigating a series of ritualistic murders occurring at Dyer's churches. As the investigation proceeds, the rationalist detective experiences a breakdown of temporal boundaries, finding himself increasingly unable to distinguish between his own identity and that of the 18th century architect. The narrative styles of the two periods begin bleeding into one another, suggesting that time operates non-linearly within the city's geometric field. Like the 18th century narrative line is like, thee, thou, booba, it's all written in the way they talk back then. And then the one written in the 1980s is very sparse and clinical, talks like how Rorschach from Watchmen talks, basically. Close to it, at least. Ackroyd's work introduces several critical concepts for urban occultism. First, the idea of psychogeographical resonance, the theory that specific locations retain emotional and historical imprints that influence present-day inhabitants. The murders in the 1980s occur not as random events, but as inevitable consequences of the geometric patterns established centuries earlier. Secondly, not a word, the concept of sacred geometry as binding. Dyer's churches form a network across London that functions as a massive occult sigil, trapping spiritual energies within the urban fabric. And third, the eternal return of urban trauma. The novel suggests that history doesn't progress linearly, but cycles through repetition. Time is a flat circle, with the city's architecture serving as the anchor that prevents true historical change. The novel treats London as a living organism with a circulatory system of streets and a nervous system of hidden connections. The genius loci, or spirit of a place, manifests not as a benevolent guardian, but as a predatory intelligence that feeds on the cyclical repetition of violence and sacrifice. Ackroyd's work demonstrates how the transition from the ancient city, built on ritual and alignment, to the rational city, planned according to Enlightenment principles, merely obscures the continued operation of irrational occult foundations. Next up is a big one. A big one. This is what got me into all this conceptual stuff, and it's going to go way deep for the third section of this series. Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell's From Hell reimagines the Jack the Ripper murders as a deliberate magical operation designed to bind the chaotic feminine energies of the ancient world and usher in the 20th century. While ostensibly a historical fiction, the work serves as a technical manual for understanding how urban geography functions as a magical implement. The narrative's pivotal fourth chapter features Dr. William Gull, the physician and Freemason responsible for the Ripper murders, conducting a psychogeographical tour of London with his coachman, John Netley. It's in my opinion, the most awesome part of the entire series. Gull demonstrates how the placement of ancient monuments, obelisks, and specifically the churches of the aforementioned Nicholas Hawksmoor form a net of solar masculine power intended to constrain the feminine telluric energies of the pre-Christian landscape of London. This tour treats the city as a living entity where blood spilled in the past remains trapped within the masonry of monuments, creating a form of architectural haunting, where the physical layout of the East End predisposes certain locations to violence based on their symbolic and geometric positioning. Moore's work extends the concept of psychogeography into the realm of political magic. The murders function not merely as crimes, but as ritual workings that reshape the collective consciousness of the future. By killing specific women at specific locations in a specific sequence, Gull creates, or the Ripper, creates a bloody signature across the city's grid that influences the development of the 20th century. This represents megalopolimancy in its most deliberate form, the use of the city's vastness and layout as a tool for historical manipulation. This is the mega ritual in action. The graphic novel also explores the concept of the palimpsest, again, that word. The city is a manuscript written, erased, and rewritten across multiple centuries. The Ripper murders become a point of convergence where multiple historical layers intersect. The ancient British landscape, Roman foundations, medieval Christianity, and modern industrialization. Moore suggests that certain locations become charged through repeated acts of violence or significance, creating permanent hotspots of dread or power within the urban fabric. This next work is one that greatly influenced the writing of From Hell. It's Iain Sinclair's LUD HEAT, 1975. Sinclair's work bridges poetry, historical research, and occult theory to establish the foundations of modern psychogeography. It's a founding work, essentially, of psychogeography. The book argues that East London functions as a charged landscape governed by invisible lines of force, historical trauma, and architectural intent. Sinclair's central thesis posits that Nicholas Hawksmoore's churches form a pentacle of power across the East End. Now, I can't remember off the top of my head. There are shapes that can be attained through lining up the churches, the Hawksmoore churches throughout London. I can't remember if it was literally, though, like a pentagram or if it was another specific religious symbol shape. But we'll get into that in part 3. Anyway, a geometric configuration that creates a magnetic field of dread. Unlike traditional sacred geometry intended to elevate the spirit, Sinclair argues that Hawksmoore's heavy, brooding stone structures serve as stone altars or power stations that anchor the darker histories of the city. The alignment of these sites traps the trauma of the Great Plague, the Blitz, and industrial exploitation, preventing these energies from dissipating and instead circulating them within the city walls perpetually. The book draws explicit connections between this architectural geometry and the Jack the Ripper murders of 1888. By mapping the canonical 5 victims against the locations of Hawksmoore's churches, Sinclair argues that the Whitechapel murders weren't random acts of violence, but ritualistic bloodletting dictated by the city's hidden layout. This theory would later influence Alan Moore's From Hell, establishing a direct lineage between Sinclair's psychogeographical research and popular understandings of urban occultism. Sinclair introduces the concept of LUD heat, the entropic and destructive forces rising in the urban sprawl, named after the mythical King Lud, who supposedly gave his name to London. It's also where we get the term Luddite, an anti-technology term, etc. This heat represents the deep subterranean history of the land that predates Roman occupation. Constantly channeled or suppressed by modern development, Sinclair suggests that the dragon veins or ley lines, these channels of life force, flowing through the earth, become constricted by concrete and pierced by subway tunnels, causing the city to experience congestion in the form of social unrest, disease, natural disasters, etc. The work treats the city as a living organism with a metabolism. The soil of London, mixed with the bone meal of ancient plague pits and the debris of the Blitz, affects the heat or vibratory frequency of the environment. This establishes a biological basis for psychogeography, suggesting that the physical composition of the urban landscape, literally the dirt and debris of history, influences the psychological states of its inhabitants. This is another big one, another big influence for this, got me into this whole theoretical framework. Hiroshi Arama's TEITO MONOGATARI, a.k.a. Tale of the Imperial Capital, 1982 to 1989 was the book series. It was also made into an anime called Doomed Megalopolis, and features one of the most iconic antagonists that's ever been put into fiction. His design essentially has influenced the design of many other characters. If you've ever seen M. Bison from Street Fighter, they jacked that whole look from the bad guy from this story. So Aramata's monumental historical fantasy epic introduces the concept of tautology, the study of Tokyo as a living, spiritual, and architectural organism. The narrative reimagines Tokyo's history from the late Meiji era through the late 20th century, treating the city as a battlefield where modern urban planning, occultism, and national destiny intersect. The work explores Tokyo's, or formerly Edo's, foundations in feng shui and onmyoto, a traditional Japanese cosmology that was, back in the olden days, like basically the government issue form of sorcery and magic, the Onmyoto Bureau, the Onmyoji. If you're interested in that, go check out my Abe no Seimei episodes. I think there's more than one. Originally, the city was designed as a geomantic fortress to protect the shogunate from malevolent spirits. The placement of Kanneji Temple to the northeast, also known as the Demon Gate or Kimon, was a deliberate move to block negative influences. However, as Tokyo modernized and adopted Western architectural styles, these ancient spiritual defenses were neglected or broken, creating leaks in the city's spiritual fabric. The antagonist, Yasunori Kato, represents the vengeful spirit of indigenous tribes conquered by the early Japanese Empire. He seeks the total annihilation of Tokyo through megalopolimancy, treating the subterranean fault lines as dragon veins or Ryumiyaku, and the city above as a ritual circle or mandala. His attempt to trigger the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake represents the ultimate act of city magic, using the urban grid to summon catastrophic forces. Aramata weaves real historical figures into his occult framework, including Dr. Makoto Nishimura, who is the creator of Gaku Tensoku, Japan's first robot, reimagined as the city's spiritual defenses. And this is real shit. Like, there's a lot of actual, real-life historical figures. Gaku Tensoko, the first Japanese robot, did exist back in, like, I think it was the 20s. And Noritsugu Hayakawa, founder of the Tokyo subway system, whose tunnels represent intrusions into the Earth's spiritual veins. The work suggests that modern civil engineering projects must contend with hauntings, and that spiritualists must utilize spirit photography and early radio technology to track occult movements, particularly the movements and plots of Yasunori Kato. The narrative argues that science and magic represent two approaches to the same unseen forces. True urban mastery requires synthesizing the rational right brain of engineering with the intuitive left brain of the esoteric. As Tokyo evolves from a feudal capital to a Victorian-style imperial center to a postmodern neon labyrinth, each layer of history becomes a layer of the city's occult skin, buried but never truly gone. Whoosh. And quick note on TEITO Monogatari, there's no English translation. I think they put out the anime, which is part of the story, but it's much more sprawling and epic than what's in the historical fantasy anime version. I think there's been a movement of sorts to get an English translation of the whole series. I haven't checked on that in quite a while, but yeah, just a heads up. If you're looking for an English translated version of this story, the anime is probably the best you're going to get at this point. But that's okay, because it's from that late 80s, early 90s era of dark, gritty, just the fucking best anime. So if you're into that, check it out. Whoosh. While we're looking at manga and anime, there's also IG Otsuka's The Kurosaki Corpse Delivery Service. Specifically, one specific story out of the whole series, although I highly recommend the series. It's pretty awesome. It's primarily a horror manga, but there's a specific narrative arc that explores the intersection of urban infrastructure and acoustic weaponry. This one particular storyline examines the Tokyo subway system as an accidental generator of lethal frequencies. The narrative draws upon the real-world research of engineer Vic Tandy, who discovered that standing waves of 18.9 hertz, a.k.a. the fear frequency, infrasound, could cause blurred vision and intense dread by vibrating the human eyeball. So in the story, subway tunnels functioned as massive organ pipes, where concrete architecture and mechanical vibrations combined with wind patterns to create a sonic sigil, a resonant frequency that aligns with the human brain's state of despair. So this represents an inversion of the actual Japanese practice of installing blue LED lights at train platforms to reduce what are known as human, what do they call it? Human incidents, or I think they call it human incidents. They have the loveliest little clean euphemisms in Japan, but it's basically to reduce the suicide rates through claiming psychological influence. So it's intended to stop people from jumping in front of the trains. The manga suggests that the same infrastructure can be tuned to produce the opposite effect, turning the metro system into a piece of hostile architecture that processes human energy through its physical grid. And the non-places of mass transit, the repetitive gray corridors, become active, volatile interfaces where environmental geometry creates fatal traps for those susceptible to its resonance. So all these sounds, these disparate sounds, etc., sort of combine in just the perfect way to more or less program people into jumping in front of trains. It's a crazy story. Good series. Check it out if you're interested. We're getting more into the technical manual, if you want to call it that, next. So next is Toby Chappell's, it's either Chappell or Chappell. I'm going to go with Chappell because it fits more in the resonance of what we're talking about, but Toby Chappell's Infernal Geometry and the Left-Hand Path. This covers the idea of angular magic. Chappell's work serves as the definitive technical manual for the Order of the Trapezoid within the Temple of Set, codifying a system of angular magic that treats geometry as a literal bridge to non-Euclidean dimensions. The text moves beyond metaphor to propose that physical angles can be manipulated to alter consciousness and pierce the material veil. The foundational principle is the law of the trapezoid, the assertion that, quote, all angles should be either obtuse or acute, for the right angle is a symbol of the stasis and imprisonment of the soul, unquote. So in this framework, 90-degree angles represent the building blocks of mundane reality, the square that anchors human consciousness in linear time and three-dimensional space. By placing oneself in environments designed with trapezoidal dimensions, the practitioner disrupts the brain's internal spatial mapping, creating window areas where the barrier between the self and higher dimensions becomes permeable. This is a two-way street, so other things can come through as well. Chappell's 9 angles, which there's no direct connection to the shitty Nazi occultist group, the Order of Nine Angles, but the 9 angles in this context refer to both EGREGORES Enneagram, not to be confused with the psychological tool, but its precursor, and there's an article written by Anton LaVey back in the fucking 50s or 60s that's something about 9 angles that the Order of Nine Angles probably originally jacked their name from back when whatever that shithead's name was that started it. But they've got a whole other direction with it. So the 9 angles in this context provides an ontological map of the universe, moving from abstract cosmic levels to the individual human psyche. The first 5 angles address the objective universe, the fundamental laws of physics and space, while the final 4 angles relate to the subjective universe, the internal world of the practitioner. By working these angles, the practitioner attempts to harmonize internal reality with the external world, gaining the ability to influence the latter through the strength of the former. The concept of strange loops, sequences that return to their beginning in logically impossible ways. The term strange loops started as a mathematical and economic term, but in this context, throughout all of this work, it features prominently in dark psychogeography, a city layout incorporating strange loops would feel inescapable. Pedestrians might walk straight lines only to return to their starting points, suggesting that the urban fabric has become a closed topological system that cannot be escaped, etc. What else have we got? Okay, next up we've got Roger de la Forest, Ces maisons qui tuent, or Houses That Kill, 1972. This is the work that discusses black streams and geopathic stress. 1972 work by French journalist Roger de la Forest explores the intersection of architecture, health, and invisible physics. Quote-unquote invisible physics, establishing foundations for geobiology and radiesthesia, or dowsing. LaForest argues that buildings function as complex energetic organisms that can sustain or drain vitality. The central concept of geopathic stress posits that the Earth is covered in an invisible web of energetic lines, specifically the Hartmann grid, electromagnetic lines forming a global network. The intersections or knots of these lines prove particularly dangerous. Positioning beds or workstations over these points can disrupt cellular resonance, leading to chronic illnesses, insomnia, and even cancer. LaForest introduces what are called ondes de forme, or shape waves, the theory that physical geometry emits specific vibratory frequencies. Certain sharp angles or architectural proportions create negative green energy, a term from French radiesthesia, or dowsing, describing dehydrating or mummifying frequencies. The book documents cancer houses, quote-unquote cancer houses, where successive families have succumbed to similar rare diseases regardless of lifestyle or genetics, attributing these patterns to subterranean water currents or black streams beneath bedrooms. The concept of memory of walls also suggests that intense emotional trauma, violent deaths, sustained hatred, etc., become imprinted on physical structures, creating psychic pollutants that influence future residents. This establishes the framework for understanding buildings not as passive shelters, but as predatory entities that accumulate and radiate historical trauma. Next is Charles Hinton's What is the Fourth Dimension? 1884. This discusses higher dimensional theory. 1884 essay serves as a foundational text for mathematical philosophy regarding higher dimensions. Rather than treating the fourth dimension as abstract algebra, Hinton approaches it as a physical reality hidden from limited human perception. Utilizing the concept of dimensional transitions, Hinton invites readers to imagine two-dimensional plane beings encountering a three-dimensional sphere. The plane beings would perceive only cross-sections, like circles expanding and contracting, arguing that human perception of time and change might actually represent three-dimensional space passing through a static four-dimensional reality. Hinton's work on the tesseract, or hypercube, which he created, invented, etc., and his colored cube mental exercises designed to help minds visualize four-dimensional space provide the technical scaffolding for understanding how architecture might anchor higher dimensional forces. If our reality is a three-dimensional slice of a four-dimensional whole, then specific geometric configurations could function as cross-sections of larger unseen structures. So basically, you, yourself, aren't all you. The four-dimensional you is a much larger structure. There's also the theory of chirality, or handedness, which suggests that four-dimensional rotation could theoretically flip three-dimensional objects into their mirror images. This implies that certain locations might allow for rotational shifts into higher planes, making them natural sites for anomalous phenomena or interdimensional contact. This idea of chirality will come into play in the Jack the Ripper episode down the road. I've tried some of these extra-dimensional space visualization exercises. Like, basically, you take every three-dimensional object creates a two-dimensional shadow. So imagine a three-dimensional shadow. What would be the shape that creates that? Like, this is the stuff that I sit around when the power goes out and try to think about, and it's entertaining. I don't know if that's the right word. It's mind-boggling, I will say that. Next up, we've got, okay, so this is more, we're moving into more of the paranormal theory stuff. John Keel's The Eighth Tower, 1975. This theoretical sequel to the Mothman prophecies proposes a unified field theory of the paranormal. He suggests that all supernatural phenomena, gods, demons, extraterrestrials, what have you, represent manifestations of a single sentient energy source operating on frequencies beyond human perception. The superspectrum theory posits that the electromagnetic spectrum familiar to science constitutes only a thin, tiny fraction of a larger continuum. A super high frequency area contains non-physical intelligences capable of manipulating matter and consciousness. These entities utilize window areas, specific geographical locations where the veil between frequencies thins, to stage theatrical displays that adapt to cultural expectations. So, appearing as elves or angels to medieval witnesses and aliens to us today. Keel characterizes this intelligence as the cosmic joker, indifferent to human welfare, operating through deception and absurdity. He suggests that humans function as quote-unquote biological computers. Wouldn't be the first to posit that idea. Being programmed by this external electromagnetic source, with cities and ancient sites serving as components of a planetary control circuit. The eighth tower of the title refers to an ancient Babylonian concept of a central control mechanism. Like, there's an old legend about 8 towers spread throughout I can't remember if it's like the world at large or just like out in the massive desolate desert of medieval Babylonian era. And the 8th tower is the home of, for all intents and purposes, like the devil figure of ancient Babylonian belief system. But this 8th tower is basically reimagined as the invisible infrastructure regulating human behavior through electromagnetic pulses. So this is like Keel's basically thesis work on his version of what would equate to Jacques Vallée's control system theory, basically. Next, we've got Andrew Collins, writer of Alien Energy, UFOs, Ritual Landscapes, and the Human Mind, 1994. Collins offers a radical departure from extraterrestrial hypothesis, arguing that UFOs represent sentient plasma-based energy forms that have coexisted with humanity since antiquity. Drawing on Wilhelm Crazy Willie Reich's orgone theory, Collins posits that these Earthlights manifest near geological fault lines, quartz deposits, and underground water veins, sites where telluric currents generate luminous phenomena. What he calls the in-beings, this is his term for non-human entities or intelligences, are characterized as ultra-terrestrial life forms inhabiting higher dimensional frequencies. These entities interact with human consciousness through symbols and archetypes, with witnesses perceiving them as gray aliens or spacecraft based, again, on cultural conditioning, cultural expectations. Collins suggests that ancient megaliths were specifically constructed to interact with or anchor these energies, creating bridges between physical and transdimensional realities. The framework reframes infernal geometry as literal confinement systems. If specific shapes attract or generate plasma vortices, then aggressive architectural geometries might function as tuning forks designed to resonate with higher dimensional energy forms. Plasma beings, ultra-terrestrials, grounding them into the physical plane against their nature or will. This is this work, Alien Energy, UFOs, Ritual Landscapes, and the Human Mind. This is a lot closer to what concepts and ideas are being explored in this series. If you're interested in the whole plasma aliens angle, check out The New Science of Heaven by, oh God, what's his name? A New Science of Heaven by Robert Temple, the guy who wrote The Serious Mystery, I think. I think it's the same guy. Anywho. Next, Patrick Harpur's Daimonic Reality, a Field Guide to the Other World, 1994. Harpur's work bridges hard science, folklore, and psychology with the concept of the daimonic. They're intermediate entities that exist in the mundus imaginalis, or imaginal world, neither purely subjective nor purely objective. He argues that modern culture has internalized these entities, rebranding them as subconscious contents or hallucinations, which strips them of their autonomy, but not their influence. When ignored, the daimonic erupts into the physical reality in forms mirroring cultural myths. Fairies in the 17th century, extraterrestrials in the 20th, etc. These encounters feature high strangeness, absurd details designed to bypass rational intellect and induce wonder or dread. The trickster archetype functions to destabilize certainty, ensuring that the other world remains uncapturable by laboratory science. Harpur's framework suggests that cities possess an anima mundi, or soul of the world. Hostile architecture, perfect grids, windowless monoliths, aggressive angles, creates a psychically crushing environment where the daimonic manifests as shadow phenomena, urban legends, inexplicable crimes, or the hitchhiker effect, etc. The modern city has eliminated the middle realm, parks, alleyways, interstitial spaces, etc., where the daimonic traditionally resided, forcing these intelligences into the hardware of the city itself, i.e. electrical grids, internet infrastructure, deep foundations, etc. Whoosh. Hey-oh, future me again, but past me to you. Hey, also, I thought I probably wouldn't have to even really mention this, but I guess I will anyways. The term daimonic is a pre-Christian term that is it's assigned to these intermediary entities that exist between the gods and humanity. And they're essentially our inner genius. They're the things that would tell Plato and Aristotle and all these dudes, like, hey, you should, like, sit down and think about this. Or, hey, go do your taxes. Or whatever. Do them early. They're the good voice that tells you to do good things and keeps you out of harm's way, essentially. And, of course, these were reappropriated and literally demonized once the monotheistic Abrahamic religions took over, etc. But it's essentially the equivalent of your own internal genius, or whatever you prefer to characterize it as. Anywho, back to the future, past, future, present, time I go. Yeah, okay. Whoosh. Speaking of the trickster, we've got George P. Hansen's The Trickster and the Paranormal, 2001. Hansen provides a multidisciplinary framework for understanding why paranormal phenomena remains elusive and relegated to societal margins. Utilizing the trickster archetype, he argues that psi phenomena is intrinsically liminal, manifesting in thresholds, margins, and betwixt and between states. The core thesis posits a binary tension between structure, i.e. order, hierarchy, science, etc., and anti-structure, i.e. chaos, magic, the marginalized, fringes, etc. Paranormal phenomena represents the ultimate expression of anti-structure, inevitably subverting attempts at systemization. When brought into highly structured environments like laboratories or the city, the trickster's nature causes effects to vanish or elude observation. Hansen suggests that deception is integral to the phenomena itself. The trickster is a deceiver by nature, and this explains why attempts to build perfect security systems or surveillance architecture often amplify rather than eliminate anomalies. The more rigid the structure, the more anti-structure pushes back, causing high strangeness to leak through cracks in the system. Next, we've got Michael Talbot's The Holographic Universe, 1991. Talbot synthesizes David Bohm's implicate order with Carl Pribram's holographic brain theory to propose that physical reality is a projection from a deeper dimension of frequency and information. In a holographic universe, separation is illusory. Every part contains the whole, and space and time are constructs of our perception. This model provides the metaphysical basis for megalopolimancy. If reality is a consensual hologram maintained by collective belief, ontological empiricism, etc., then architecture functions as programming code for the collective human experience. Infernal geometry becomes interference patterns introduced into the projection, discordant angles that disrupt the local frequency of space, creating the architectural uncanny by forcing the brain's frequency analyzer to process information misaligned with standard Euclidean grids. Psychogeography is reframed as navigation of holographic interference patterns. If every street corner contains the data of the entire city's history, then haunted locations represent coordinates where the holographic data stream has become looped or static, causing past events to manifest as persistent spectral projections, stone tape theory, residual hauntings, etc. Next, we've got Mark Z. Danielewski's House of Leaves, year 2000. Danielewski's labyrinthine novel centers on a house on Ash Tree Lane that contains impossible interior dimensions, a spatial void exceeding its external footprint. Through the fragmented narrative of the Navidson Record, a documentary film about the house, and the footnotes of the blind scholar Zampano, the book explores how domestic space can become predatory and non-Euclidean. This book is kind of infamous and historical for being sort of a puzzle in itself, essentially. The house's interior features are constantly like a constantly shifting labyrinth that expands infinitely inward, defying architectural logic and threatening to consume those who explore its depths. This represents the ultimate expression of infernal geometry, space that's not merely hostile but actively hungry, violating the laws of physics to create a portal into an abyss. The novel treats the house as a text, with its layout encoded in the typographical presentation of the book. So, like certain rooms and the structuring of paragraphs and sentences on the page are supposed to mirror each other, essentially. All the labyrinths, twists, the footnotes that descend downstairs into darkness, and just keep going. House of Leaves functions as a manual for understanding how space can exceed its dimensions, creating what the text calls the 5.5-minute hallway, a corridor that takes longer to traverse than its length should allow. This temporal spatial distortion aligns with Lovecraftian non-Euclidean geometry while grounding it in the familiarity of a suburban landscape, making the horror more acute through contrast with the everyday world. The novel also explores the psychogeographical effects of the house on its inhabitants and those who study it. The characters experience disassociation, madness, and obsession as they attempt to map the unmappable, suggesting that exposure to impossible geometries fundamentally alters human consciousness. The house becomes a theory fiction object, existing at the intersection of academic discourse and supernatural horror, demonstrating how the built environment can rewrite the rules of reality itself. Here's another big one. Mark Stavish's EGREGORES, the occult entities that watch over human destiny. Stavish examines egregores as autonomous psychic structures created when groups share common purposes or beliefs. These thought forms initially served their creators but developed self-preservation instincts, eventually dominating the groups that birthed them. Symbols, such as flags, logos, religious icons, etc., serve as anchors for these entities in our physical world, while rituals function as feeding mechanisms. Chum buckets. Applied to urban environments, this suggests that cities are physical bodies of massive egregores. Early city planning utilized geomancy to ensure these entities remain stable, but modern megalopolises have evolved into predatory forms. The watchers of a city are reinforced by its skyline. Grand architecture demands awe and energy from its inhabitants, anchoring the collective thought form into the bedrock of the streets. The term egregore comes from the term, Greek? I think it's Greek egregoros, meaning wakeful one, the watcher. So this is another concept that is going to be more heavily explored in the second episode of this series, but Stavish warns that individuals become enmeshed in egregores, losing sovereignty to the group mind. In the context of hostile architecture, closed geometric patterns can create localized egregores that thrive on stress and claustrophobia, keeping the collective mind focused inward to prevent spiritual liberation or rebellion against state powers. Next, this is a fun book. I highly suggest anyone and everyone to check it out, or at least check out the author's website. Jeff Manah's A Burglar's Guide to the City, 2016. Manah argues that burglars are the ultimate architectural critics, navigating cities through fourth-dimensional topology, where walls are porous and security is fluid. The book explores how criminals understand the intent of space better than its inhabitants, treating buildings as interconnected tunnels rather than solid masses. The concept of architectural topology reveals the city as a fluid landscape, where 2 points seemingly separated by walls are actually connected by the potential for a whole. This aligns closely with the occult concept of interstitial spaces. This would equate to like the vents, crawl spaces, and voids between drywall that function as modern ley lines. Manah's examination of crime prevention through environmental design, or CPTED, reveals it as a modern secular geomancy, using defensible space, sight lines, and territorial markers to create psychically uncomfortable environments for quote-unquote unauthorized individuals. This represents the rational, surveillance-oriented counterpoint to the irrational, liminal spaces explored in psychogeography. The book documents cases like the George Leonidas Leslie gang. These were architects who built full-scale vault replicas to practice their robberies, and the 1971 Baker Street robbery in London, tunneling into a vault from a neighboring basement, demonstrating how understanding blueprints and urban infrastructure allows for the subversion of intended spatial use. This applied geometry of burglary mirrors the applied geometry of occult practices, both requiring intimate knowledge of the hidden currents and structures underlying apparent reality. There's also a group in Los Angeles that was never caught, and I applaud them for that. Group of bank robbers who they got away with two bank hits by coming up through the ground, under the ground, into the bank vaults. And after they'd done it 2 times, they had a third site going, but the police found it, and they basically had to abandon their plans. But they got away. No one ever found them. So good on you, fellas. Unless you, like, murdered or killed someone. They didn't in these situations, but if they're just bank robbers, fucking hey, go for it. And then the last few are just, like, a couple randos. Weimar-era German expressionist cinema. Films such as Metropolis, 1927, and The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, 1920, provide essential visual vocabularies for infernal geometry. Their use of forced perspective, impossible angles, and oppressive urban landscapes established the aesthetic framework for understanding the city as a mechanism of control and madness. Building blog, BLDG. That's Jeff Manaz, the author of The Burglar's Guide to the City. This is his speculative architecture blog, which continues to this day to explore how infrastructure, landscape, and buildings form planetary scale systems that may possess emergent intelligence or agency, bridging the gap between architectural theory and occult speculation. There's just, man, you can spend hours, if you're interested in architecture at all, in any way, you could just spend hours on this site just looking at some of the crazy theoretical concepts that this guy is just tossing out left and right. The aforementioned James Shelby Downard, whose theories of occult topography regarding Masonic architecture and psychogeographical patterning in urban planning, particularly regarding the Kennedy assassination, King Kill 33, and the encoding of alchemical symbolism in American infrastructure, provide a distinctly American perspective on these themes. There's the YouTuber Praveen Mohan. Love his channel. Mohan's research into sacred temple architecture, archaic symbolism, and esoteric engineering in ancient structures, particularly Hindu and Southeast Asian temples, offers comparative material for understanding how pre-modern civilizations encoded occult principles into stone and masonry. There's also the Fulcanelli mysteries. Now, this is such a huge, overreaching thing. I plan on doing a, hopefully not too far in the future, episode or episodes, however much it takes to get it all, just to cover this particular topic. But the Fulcanelli mysteries revolve around the enigmatic writings of the alchemical master Fulcanelli and his alleged apprentice Eugene Cansalier that merge alchemical symbolism, sacred architecture, and builders' rights. Their work suggests that Gothic cathedrals and other sacred structures contain encoded alchemical processes in the stonework, representing a Western tradition of architectural occultism that parallels the Eastern traditions explored in TEITO MONOGATARI, a.k.a. Doomed Megalopolis. But this is basically like, all the Fulcanelli mystery stuff is basically just a huge occult scavenger hunt of hidden knowledge and how within builders' rights that the processes for building sort of mirror the steps that one needs to alchemically evolve, essentially, like within, free yourself, your mind, etc., individuate, whatever. Whoosh. Now, what the hell, while I'm here, I might as well throw in the rest of the bibliography that I've used so far. There's Hagia Sophia, a.k.a. Temple of Saturn. The Hagia Sophia, Form, Structure, and Meaning by R. Mark and A. Kakmak, 1992. Hagia Sophia, Sanctum of Kronos, Spiritual Descent in an Age of Tyranny by Peter Mark Adams, 2023. He's the guy that also did The Game of Saturn, which is highly recommended. Definitely want to check that out. The Architectural Uncanny, Essays in the Modern Unhomely by Anthony Bidler, 1992. Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison by Michael Foucault, 1975. Panopticon, or The Inspection House by Jeremy Bentham, 1791. The Architecture of Modern Italy, Terry Kirk, 2005. Tyranny and the Casa del Fascio by Peter Eisman, 2003. Theory of the Derive, Guy Debord, 1956. And The Society of the Spectacle, also Guy Debord, 1967. The L'Enfant Plan, L'Enfant, National Archives / Library of Congress, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital by David Ovison, 1999. The Mauling of America by William Severini Kowinski, 1985, and The Heart of Our Cities by Victor Gruen, 1964. That's about the Gruen effect, mentioned in episode 1. There's Tokyo, A Cultural History, Stephen Mansfield, 2009, and Records of the International Military Tribunal for the Far East from the National Archives. Tairo no Masakato's Grave. There's The Lore of the Ghost in Tokyo by Catrion Ross, 1996, and The Legends of Tairo no Masakato, Historical Records of the Otamachi District. There's Hard Drive, The DeLorean Story by Nick Sutton, 2013. The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries by W.Y. Evans Witts, 1911, as well as the Dollop episode covering both John DeLorean as well as Frank Lloyd Wright. There's Hauntings and the Psychic Ether Hypothesis, H. Price, 1939, and The Stone Tape, BBC teleplay by Nigel Neal, 1972. The Vastu Vidya of Ancient India by Tarapada Bhattacharya, 1986. The Art and Practice of Western Geomancy by John Michael Greer, 2009. The 12 Devils' Graveyards Around the World, Ivan T. Sanderson, 1972. The Planetary Grid, A New Synthesis by C. Bird and B. Higgins, 1984. Necropolis, London and Its Dead by Catherine Arnold, 2006. And that's just for episode 1. All the stuff I read out and got in depth on, that's for the whole series. But the ones that I just listed off just now, it's for episode 1. So there will be whole hell of a lot of reading and dissecting I have to do. But yeah. Whoosh. But this bibliography establishes the theoretical foundations for understanding the city as a living, breathing entity, capable of being read, influenced, and potentially weaponized through attention to its hidden geometries and energetic currents. From Lovecraft's impossible angles to Leiber's paramental entities, from Ackroyd's temporal palimpsests to Danielewski's infinite hallways, these works collectively suggest that the built environment is never neutral. It is always already magical, and it is always already watching and waiting. Maybe even influencing our evolution from a secret vantage point. But we'll get into that later down the road. This is going to be it for this 1.5er episode. This is just all the literary and esoteric foundations that go into this overarching, massive theoretical framework of megalopolimancy. I hope you enjoyed this. It's just like a little, bonus material, I guess. So, yeah. Check out some of these books if you're interested in further delving into this subject matter. Pretty entertaining, pretty mind-blowing stuff. Don't just expand your mind, but paint the walls with it. Metaphorically speaking. That's going to do it for this 1.5 episode of Kooks, Cranks, and Iconoclast, the podcast. I'm your host, Mike Luck. I need a glass of water. I will see you in the outer limits of the Twilight Zone in our next episode. Peace.